Question number one, can you see my slides? Can you see my slide, Kim?
Yes, go for it. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for that introduction, Kim. That was awesome. I will kind of go into a little bit more background about myself. This is a part 2 of this class I've been teaching. So let me get to the title slide. What we're going to do today is we're going to continue this Predator series that I've been doing. This is part 2. This is called The Meal. The first part, which was about a month ago, was called The Takedown, and it talks about how different groups or different families of apex predators will take down their prey source. And the 3 main groups we'll be talking about, we talked about last time, were the canids, or the dogs, the felines, or the cats, and then the ursids, which are the bears. And so we're going to keep along with that theme. But for today, we're going to be talking about the meal and how these different groups of animals can consume their meal, and that there's very telltale signs about it. Before we jump into that, one of the things I always do before every talk is to let people know a bit about the instructors. This particular talk is being led by me. I do have a degree in wildlife management. I've spent my career working with large apex predators. I've done everything from managing a bear center just outside of Great Smoky Mountain National Park to being the statewide deer, bear, and elk coordinator for the state of Tennessee. I was also the chief of wildlife for Tennessee. And nowadays I find myself, instead of working for state government, I'm working for the federal government down here in the States. And I've worked with the U.S. Forest Service as well as the Bureau of Land Management as wildlife specialist, mostly in those big, large, charismatic animals. So I'll be teaching a class. I want you to know that what I'm presenting is some of the latest, up-to-date, greatest scientific information that we know of. So it's not because I slept in a Holiday Inn last night. But the other thing I want to tell you is I do have a lot of people that help me with these presentations. The one that helped put this presentation together was Stephanie Payne. She can't join us tonight. But she's an incredible wealth of knowledge when it comes to apex predators. She actually coordinated wildlife human attack response training. It's the most horrific acronym you could ever imagine because it's WART. But they deal with a lot of apex predators and how they attack their prey and consume their prey. So she did help me with this presentation. Combined, we have over 35 years experience dealing with these animals. So with that, I'm going to jump into today's presentation. I'm going to start with the same question I started with last time. And it's, why are we studying this? Why do we care about how these apex predators either take down their meal or enjoy their meal? For the most part, there's a picture of a wildlife biologist. That's Mark Payton. He works for the National Park Service. There are biological nerds like Mark and myself and maybe some other folks on this call that absolutely love wildlife and want to learn or even have a career in studying these animals, because it's so interesting to know the habits and behaviors of these animals. But when it comes to apex predators, the fact that they sometimes kill these other large animals, for the most part, they're killing other wild animals like deer and elk and bighorn sheep, but occasionally an apex predator may kill some livestock. It may kill a head of cattle or some sheep or some goats. And you may not see the actual event take place. And you want to know, what kind of animal is affecting me personally? What kind of animals killing the livestock that I own? Or there's even worse situations where sometimes they even come so close that they may take a family pet. You might have a dog or a cat that goes missing and you want to know what happened to that animal. And so by folks like myself and a number of the other wildlife biologists that have spent their career studying these animals, we've learned some things that can help us differentiate what animal was the actual cause of another animal being preyed upon. And there's very specific clues and there's reasoning. And so what I wanted to do is spend about 45 minutes talking to you about it, but the way I'm going to talk to you about it is hopefully it just puts it in very basic, very simple to understand lessons that kind of get the light bulb to go off in your head, say, oh, I get it now. I understand why they do that because of this. Because all too often, I know growing up, going through high school, going through college, you were meant to just study and remember something. And then 2 weeks later, you pretty much forgot everything that you studied for. If you can develop that bridge, that understanding of this is what happens and here's the reason why, it will stick with you so much longer. So that's my hope for today. So what we're going to do before we jump into the meal, since this is part 2, I want to do a quick go back and talk about part 1, which was the takedown, where we talked about how different animals or groups of animals take down their prey. So one of the groups we focused on were the canids. And if you recall from our first talk, the canids, they're a little bit different than the other groups because the canids often hunt in packs, more than one individual. It could be 2 wolves, it could be 6 or 7 wolves. Sometimes it's the whole pack that gets involved with the takedown. And the strategy that they employ when they're trying to capture their prey item, I liken them to these marathon runners. They will select an animal, and yes, they will go for typically the weaker or easier prey item. They don't want to do battle with the strongest and most the strongest animal of an elk herd. They want to single out that young elk or that old elk or that injured elk. And what they'll do then is the pack of wolves will begin chasing it, and they will run it, and they will run it. They'll run it as far as they can run it. And what they're doing is they're wearing that animal down. So it will make for a much easier kill. Because remember, all of these animals, they pretty much have only one weapon when they're trying to secure their prey source. And that's their mouth full of large canine teeth. But there's a lot of risk that they put themselves through because a swift kick from a healthy or strong or very energetic animal can do quite a bit of damage to some of these predators. And so they want to weaken it as much as they can. So with the wolves, they tend to be these marathon runners chasing the animal, giving the animal constant nips in the back end, trying to weaken it, trying to hamstring it possibly. And eventually that animal will wear out. Oftentimes they'll look for water or some high ground, but by that time they're completely worn out and the pack could eventually move in for the kill. They will still focus on the back end while one wolf attracts them at the front end, and eventually they can overwhelm the animal. The other group of animals that we spent quite a bit of time on were the felids, or the cats. Now here in North America, which includes obviously the US and Canada, we're talking primarily about cougars. Now, cougars nowadays are primarily Western North America. Up in Canada, they're starting to move quite further eastward than in the States. In the States, we're still pretty much west of the Mississippi. Excuse me. But the way that cougars hunt is they don't hunt in packs. They're pretty much solitary hunters. Occasionally you'll have a female with her offspring, but even then the offspring tend not to get involved with the takedown. It's usually the mom showing the offspring how they take down an animal by themselves. And the way the cats do it, instead of being the marathon runner, they are the sprinter. They're the ambush predator. So they lay in wait until their prey item gets close enough, and then they do a mad dash and get on top of that animal as quickly as possible. Now this, as opposed to the wolves, this is a one-on-one battle. And cougars are often outsized by their prey, and they could easily get hurt. So the goal for the cat or the cougar is to kill that animal as quickly as possible. Therefore, when they do attack their prey source, they're usually attacking the head. They're trying to get on the animal's back, so they can either bite at the underside of their throat to pinch off the air pipe, the larynx, or even better is where they get on the back of the animal and they're able to deliver a really killing blow by crushing the base of the skull or the vertebrae. It's typically an instant death if they can get their jaws around the back of the animal's neck. And so the goal there is to kill it quickly. So they're ambush predators. They, like I said, they're likened to these sprinters. They want to do it as quickly and as effectively as possible. And then the last group of animals were the ursids, or the bears, which we know quite a bit about because of RecSafe. Now, they're a little bit different than both the canids and the felids. And the bears, the best way to describe them are they are the barroom brawlers. Now, unlike the other two animals, bears don't rely on meat. Wolves and cougars, they are true carnivores. They're obligate carnivores. They've got to kill in order to eat to survive. Bears are omnivores. They can eat anything. They do eat anything. So most of their diet consists of vegetable matter, but if they do get meat, they will absolutely enjoy that. But it's kind of like an added bonus. And so bears don't wake up one day and say, oh, I could go for an elk and go hunting for elk. What they do is if they stumble upon an animal that they can capture, whether or not it's an elk calf or a bison calf or another easy prey item for them, they more or less maul it. Now, don't get me wrong, bears can be extremely fast and agile, but once they get their paws on an animal, it is like a wrestling match, and the bear's just simply trying to overwhelm it with brute force. They will be delivering fatal blows or bites with their jaw, but for the most part, the bears kind of wrestle and just maul the animal into submission and eventual death. So very different takedown strategies from those three animals. So that is how all three of those groups of animals secure their prey. So once they take down an elk, once they take down a bighorn sheep, a deer, whatever it is, that carcass, that meal has been secured. So now they're sitting there with the meal. And one of the things that they've got to do, let's see if I can move something here. One of the things to remember for all three of these animals is after they secure the meal, it's not time to, it's not like they sit there and rejoice and invite their friends over. The work is not done yet. It's not time to relax. Now, one of the things I'm going to do, I hate doing it, but I do want to throw some jargon or some really nerdy biological terms at you, and this is one of my favorite terms. Hopefully, someone has heard of the term kleptoparasitism. Total geek term that wildlife biologists love to use, but what this term means, kleptoparasitism, it is when one animal robs the food from another animal. And believe it or not, in this apex predator world, it happens a whole lot more than we ever imagined. And this is really important for a number of reasons. So take a typical scene where there's a large carcass laying on the landscape. You could have multiple predators there. And in fact, look at this picture. Look at this picture. Besides the ravens in the picture, there's three large predators there, different species of large predators. You have obviously the brown bear or the grizzly bear. The canines to the left are wolves, and that canine to the right, just behind the bear's butt, is actually a coyote. And so if you come upon the scene, how are you to know what animal killed that? If that's an elk carcass, what animal killed that elk? And so that is where you can begin looking at clues and understanding how animals are taken down, but also you would eventually be able to determine what animals actually fed on that by the way the pattern of consumption. But before we get into that, let's talk about this apex pecking order. Because this kleptoparasitism, just because one animal kills a prey item, it does not mean that animal then eats that prey item. And so what we're going to do, and I'm trying my best, folks, to keep this lesson PG. I will have a quiz later that you can step away from if you don't want to see some real life pictures. But for the most part, we'll keep it PG. But we're gonna teach you something here. So say you have a carcass. Say you have, I don't know if that's an elk or a moose. They have moose antlers, but it seems more like a deer carcass. Anyway, say you have a cervid carcass laying on the landscape and it was killed. Okay, let's say it was killed by a cougar or what we call a mountain lion. That mountain lion may very well have killed that deer. But the thing is, in this apex pecking order, the mountain lion's not on top, because if that mountain lion is feeding on that carcass and along comes a wolf, we all know the world of cats and dogs, that dogs tend to chase cats, or at least chase away cats. So if a lone wolf shows up, there's a good chance that cougar is going to leave. Now, that wolf could then try claiming that carcass and feeding on that carcass. But what comes along? You can have a black bear come along. Black bears tend to be much larger than a single wolf. A single wolf might go 50 to 80 kilograms. I'm trying to use Canadian terms, so I'm doing the math in my head. But a bear will be much larger than a wolf. And so typically that wolf will be scared off the carcass by the black bear. And then we go up that pecking order. And so along comes a grizzly, which can be much larger than a black bear. In many cases, it can be much larger than a black bear. And obviously that black bear will back down. Now, you would think this is where it ends. The grizzly is amongst the biggest of those apex predators. But you got to remember that lone wolf, he's pretty smart. And so sometimes he might come back to that prey source. He's going to bring his clan with him. And so you have a whole pack of wolves. And a whole pack of wolves, depending on the bear, could easily scare away that grizzly. And so you would think then and there you would have the highest of the pecking order. So a pack of wolves is pretty formidable. Not many wild animals are going to be chasing a pack of wolves off a kill site. There is one more apex predator, which I hate mentioning, but you know they're on the landscape. It's humans. And so oftentimes humans would be the dominant animal on the landscape, especially obviously if they're armed. And so that human could probably easily scare away that whole pack of wolves. And that's where you think it would probably end there. But of course we do have grizzlies and they can always come in and do that, but that's not a good thing. It does happen occasionally, unfortunately, but that typically, in general speaking terms, describes the pecking order. So you have cougars, which are kind of on the bottom. You have the single wolf, a black bear, a grizzly, and then obviously a pack of wolves. Now, having said this, again, this is all generalities, and so you could have a large cougar and a single scrawny wolf show up, and that single scrawny wolf's not going to scare away a big cougar. Or you could have a big black bear fend off a small yearling grizzly. So there's nuances in all of this, but for the most part, just because an animal, the main point here is just because an animal kills a prey item, it does not mean that animal gets to eat that prey item. And so the interesting thing here that we're learning more and more is this can have tremendous impacts in just within nature, within populations, for example. Cougars are one of the most efficient predators out there. I believe they kill like a large deer-sized animal, usually about every 7 to 10 days. And so if they kill a deer or a young elk or whatever it is, and they make that kill, and then suddenly they're bumped off by a black bear or a grizzly, and they eat the prey, the cougar's got to kill again. So it definitely has the ability to increase the rate of predation on some of these prey animals. And that's some of the stuff that biologists today are just now studying. So it's really, really interesting stuff. So Here's a question for you. Is there a strategy that say the killing animal that wants to enjoy that food that they just risk their lives to hunt down and kill? Is there a strategy they could use to keep that animal from being stolen, that prey item from being stolen? And unfortunately, Kim, I can't see the chat box, but if hopefully,
we already have an answer.
what is it?
It's food caching.
Oh, you're awesome. Whoever said that, you get a gold star. So food caching, perfect answer. So you're this large apex predator. You invest a lot of time and energy and risk to kill a large animal. Say you kill a mule deer, a large mule deer, and then you want to eat it, but you need a break. You just expended a lot of energy. You're not ready to eat it just yet. You want to come back and eat it in a few hours, or it's going to take you a week to eat that animal because you're all by yourself and you don't want any other animals to find it. And so oftentimes these apex predators will employ this idea of caching. And what caching is, it's to store something away, kind of to hide it away or tuck it away so you can use it for future use. So you can eat on an animal for a little bit, cache it, cover it up, hide it, so to speak, and then come back the next day or even later in that day, and the animals still be there, and there's less likelihood of another apex predator stealing your food source. And so one of the things that drives me absolutely nuts, because I do a lot of social media, I'm on a lot of Facebook stuff here and there, is inevitably someone will post a picture of a deer in a tree. And you would not believe how many people think that this is, well, what do you think a lot of people would attribute this picture to? What animal put that deer up in a tree? And again, I can't see, but believe me, whenever you're on Facebook or any of these other social media, automatically there's going to be a whole bunch of people that say, oh, that's a cougar. They store their deer up in a tree. And folks, that is one of the biggest myths there are. Here's the reason being. These animals cache their food. They're trying to hide their food. Just so you know where this myth was born, if you probably watched Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, you've probably seen where a leopard has killed an antelope or a gazelle, and they drag the antelope up in the tree and feed on it there. You have to understand, in that type of ecosystem, in that type of environment where you have, it's the Serengeti-like plains system, where you have jackals and hyenas and African lions, all of which want to eat that antelope as well, which cannot climb trees. Those apex predators cannot climb trees. The leopard is really smart to drag their prey up there to keep it away from the other apex predators. Now, here in North America, where cougars live, they have evolved for thousands and thousands of years alongside this amazing critter that we call the black bear. And guess which animal can climb trees better than a mountain lion? Is a black bear. So a cougar has never evolved to cache or put their prey up into a tree, because literally all that would be doing is putting their kill that they worked hard for on display for any black bear out there to say, hey, here's what I killed, come and eat it. It would actually probably distribute the aroma of that animal even further. So typically when an animal in North America, especially cougars, when they try to cache an animal, they bury it. They try to cover it up with dirt and leaves and branches and duff, not only to get it out of sight, but also to really tamp down the aromas that dead animal will soon be casting. But for the most part, cougars always cache their prey on the ground. I've known numerous cougar biologists that have visited literally thousands of cougar prey sites, cache sites, and not a single one has ever been discovered up in a tree. Typically, when this happens, you see it a lot in the east. It's near a floodplain. So a river gets up, kills some deer, washes away, they get caught in the branches. Sometimes we've even had reports where humans were playing pranks and put the deer up in the tree themselves. But for the most part, this is not the work of a cougar. So sorry to burst any bubbles out there. Anyway, moving on. So what we're going to talk about now is we're going to go through those three groups of animals and how they, after they have taken down the animal, how they go ahead and consume the animal. The first question we'll always answer is, do they cache it? So we're gonna talk about canids right here. And the first thing I want to say is, when you're talking about canids, you're usually talking about a wolf or wolf pack, and they do not cache their prey simply because there are going to be multiple mouths to feed. And so they typically consume their prey literally within a day. And so there's no need to hide it for days on end because it's not going to last that long. So wolves or canids typically do not cache their prey. So how do they consume it? We'll call it the consumption strategy, or feeding strategy would be easier. But keep in mind, wolves typically require about 3 to 5 pounds of meat per day. Now, that does not mean they're eating that amount of meat per day. Sometimes they go many days, even a week or two, without a kill, and then they'll gorge themselves. But a lot of it, they've got to eat quite a bit of fresh meat to sustain themselves and all the members of their pack. And like I said, when they take down an animal, whether or not it's a deer, moose, elk, bison, whatever it is, there's going to be multiple animals feeding on that carcass. As soon as that animal goes down, the whole pack will come in. Primarily, the more dominant animals will feed on the best parts. The subordinate animals will get what's left, but because there's so many mouths to feed, it's going to consume that whole carcass in a relatively short amount of time. And like I said, the most nutritious parts are eaten first, so those more dominant animals get the luxury of eating the vital organs, the heart, the lungs, the liver. Whatever's left from the meat and the bones is left for those lesser animals in that pack. And so those nutritious parts are eaten first. You'll see that's a common thread. When it comes to eating the whole carcass, wolves are pretty good. They will, depending on when their last meal was, they will eat pretty much everything from that animal. And so the only thing left when it comes to the bones, like some of the largest bones, hip bones, the pelvis, the skull, probably the backbone, maybe some of the large leg bones might get left, although they do try to crack into them to get to the inside of those bones. The marrow inside is extremely nutritious for the predator. But the utilization, how much of that carcass gets eaten, can vary a little bit. And here, I'm a nerdy biologist, so I'm going to throw up a crazy graph. Don't want you to decipher, but literally what this graph says is the more kills that the wolf or the wolf pack does per week, then the less they'll consume. So if they have not eaten for a while and they make a kill, they're going to eat almost 100% of that carcass. If they just made a kill a few days before and they're still kind of full from the last meal, they won't eat all of it. They might leave more of the larger bones. They'll be a little bit more picky. But here's an interesting thing on that graph. If you look at the high and low of the portion that's utilized, it goes from 84% to 97%. So even when they're being very picky, they're still eating 85% of that carcass. So the animals, very few animals, there's only one two-legged animal I know of that kills for fun. When these apex predators kill an animal, they are killing it because they need it and they will consume it. And so very interesting stuff when it comes to the canids. Because of those multiple mouths to feed, it's usually a mass scramble. And the best way to describe it, if you come from a large family, or if you've ever been to a Thanksgiving dinner and you put some of the best dishes in the middle of the table, it's a free-for-all of who can get it first, and you want to get your portion before it's all gone. And that's how wolves typically consume their meal. Now, felids, or cougars in this case, again, let's start with this caching question. Do cougars cache their prey? Absolutely. I had the pleasure of working with Mark Payton, the National Park Service gentleman from the first slide. He was studying cougars in northern New Mexico, and he invited me on a couple of his field trips where he was going to a cougar kill site. And this was one of the first, it wasn't the first, but it was one of the first sites that we visited. And he received a call from someone in a small town just outside the national park, and they said they went for a walk behind their house, and about 100 yards or 100 meters behind their house, they found this. And if you look carefully, it is a mule deer carcass that has been covered up. So this is a perfect example of a cougar cache site. And so you can see if this was off the trail and you were hiking along, not really paying attention, it might be really easy to walk by this. And this is kind of what the cougar's hoping for, is that not only does it, all that duff and all that material on top of the deer carcass keep the smells down, but also visually, it keeps the vultures and everything else away from that animal. So perfect example of a cougar cache site. And the reason we knew this for sure is we set up a trail camera over it, and sure enough, we were able to snare a cougar and affix a radio collar to it. And so that was one of the many cougars that he had in his study. So that was one of the really cool things I got to do in northern New Mexico. Now, when it comes to these cats and their feeding strategy or consumption strategy, getting tongue-tied here. Cougars, primarily, again, there's little wiggle with all this, but primarily an adult cougar will kill a large prey item roughly every 7 to 10 days. Again, that could be increased greatly if they make a kill and then a bear or a wolf or something pushes them off. But for the most part, if they're killing it and eating it, it's about every 7 to 10 days. Now, typically, unlike the wolf scenario, you only have one animal feeding on the carcass. Now, there could be a situation with a mom and her cubs. If the cubs are really young, the mom is still going to be feeding on it to produce the milk that the cubs will drink. But once the cubs, I've got massive allergies going on right now. Once the cubs get of age, they will begin feeding with mom. But for the most part, it's going to be a solitary cougar feeding on the animal. And one of the things that we use when we put that radio collar on that cougar, it's going to take a single animal roughly maybe 3 to 4 to 5 days to eat that entire deer carcass. And so when they stay in one particular area for 6 hours or more, we know that they're probably on a kill site, a fresh kill site. And that's when we could go in and start doing our studies. So it's really cool to see, to track these animals and see when they're on a kill site, because you know they're not moving from that kill site for a number of days. Now, when they go to consume that animal, this is one of the things that's really interesting with cats. For some reason, they will take the time to, not all the time, but they will sometimes pluck the hair off the underside of the animal. Now, what they're doing is they're trying to go for the most nutritious part of the animal first. Everything's within that chest cavity that's most nutritious. And it's funny because sometimes you can see where the cat has actually bit and tore out clumps of hair, so it's not consuming a large amount of hair. Like I said, the most nutritious parts are going to be within that chest cavity, and those things are eaten first. So the heart, the lungs, the liver, all that stuff, all those vital organs are hugely beneficial from a nutrition standpoint for that cougar. And so they're going to eat that first. The weird thing about cougars, though, is they tend not to like to eat the stomach and digestive tract of the animals that they kill. Sometimes they will, depending on how hungry they are. But if they're in a routine where they're making routine kills, they tend not to eat the stomach. They will actually remove it and put it off to the side. Another crazy thing with cougars is they have tremendously powerful jaws, and they will eat bones, like large bones, crushing, eating everything. So femurs and everything. Oftentimes, they will eat all the bones within that carcass except for the largest, most hardest. So like the skull that has like the teeth, which are extremely hard. So only the very largest bones and the teeth will be left. Strangely enough, they don't like hooves. Dogs love to eat hooves, but a lot of times on cougar kill sites, you'll see remnants of the prey item's hooves. Why? I don't know that. Again, a lot will depend on how hungry that animal is. So very different feeding pattern when it comes to cougars and wolves. And that leads us to the last group, which is the ursids. And when it comes to caching, you would think with them being, especially the grizzlies being the apex predator, that they don't cache. Believe it or not, bears love to cache their food. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So that big mound there is not just a pile of mud and hay. There is a carcass under that. And that's a big old grizzly. And if you ever encounter this in the wild, this is not an area you want to hang around, because that's his prized prey cache site. And so bears are notorious for caching their prey. Now, how do they consume their prey? And this is where I kind of hope the light bulb goes off. Let's jump back to the wolves and the cougars. They are obligate carnivores. They have to kill and eat fresh meat in order to stay alive. The bear does not. The bear is an omnivore. So think of that big old hunk of meat as a dessert. It's a bonus, because they can survive just fine eating berries and insects and all these other things that they find throughout their day. If they get a big old fresh carcass of whatever, it's like gravy on top. So this is kind of a bonus for them. Now, typically, when they do have a prey item, it's going to be one bear feeding on it. And so very much like the cougar, it's going to be one animal feeding on it. So one thing I forgot to mention, when the wolves feed on a prey item, and there's many wolves, they will tear it apart. They're going to rip it and fight for the last scrap of food. And so that feeding site is, I hate to say it, but it's a bloody mess. Things are scattered all over the place because these dogs are competing for getting a hunk of meat. The bears and the cougars don't do that. There's typically one animal feeding on that carcass. Now, occasionally, bears, because they're not dependent on that, they're not going to dive in and eat those internal organs first, because they're not dependent on that. Like I said, this is kind of a dessert meal for them. And so caching it, they don't care if it's fresh meat. You know, bears will pretty much, if they love garbage, they're going to pretty much eat anything. So leaving it in that the cache will cause that carcass to actually soften up. They can actually get more nutrition out of it, because you're then going to have some insect larvae, which the bears are happy to consume. They're pretty much gluttons when it comes to what they're eating. So when they do sit down to finally eat that meal, again, they're not going to do it all in one sitting, but this is their dessert. They're just going to start eating. Typically, they start at the back end and start working their way forward. So it's not a rush to get those internal organs. They're just eating because they got a really good meal to feed on that night. And because they're not so dependent, they often leave many bones. They're not ones to crunch through everything to get every last morsel out of that carcass. And so bears typically, I don't want to say they're lazy eaters, but they're not as desperate eaters as the cougars and the wolves. And so they're going to consume that animal in a haphazard fashion, kind of starting at the back end and just trying to consume it moving forward. Not many animals are going to push a bear off a carcass, so that bear will have that carcass to feed on pretty much for as long as he wants. So that is the feeding strategy of the bears. So let me do a little summary here for these three animals, the canids, felids, and the bears. And so we'll start with the cache. Remember, wolves, many mouths to feed. They're not going to cache it because that prey item will disappear quickly. Cougars and bears will both cache their prey source. It's going to take them multiple days to eat on it because there's a single solitary eater there. So they will cache their prey site or their prey. Where do they start eating the carcass? That wolf will go, especially those dominant wolves, will go into that chest cavity, get those most nutritious organs. Same with the cougar. They want to get those organs first. They're obligate carnivores. They need to kill and eat fresh meat. So they're going to get the best, most bang for their buck when they start feeding off that carcass. The bear, they'll go on one end and just start eating forward. When it comes to eating the stomach contents, wolves, sometimes, well, most of the time they'll eat it. Obviously, the lesser animals in the pack will probably be pushed down to eat the less desirable pieces of meat. But yes, most of the time the stomach will be eaten, but not by the dominant animals. Cougars, rarely, if they're feeding properly, they rarely eat the stomach contents. Oftentimes you see that stomach pulled and placed off to the side. And bears, heck, the stomach is just another flavor of a treat for them when they're eating. When it comes to eating the bones, wolves, again, they'll eat a lot of the bones. Again, depending on how hungry that pack is, they'll chew on the bones. They don't have the strongest bite compared to some of the other animals, so they're going to leave some of the larger bones behind. The cougar has a very strong bite, and they're going to consume most of those bones, even a good portion of the skull, pelvis, femur. Very few bones remain after a cougar's been feeding on it. Well, the bear is most picky. He's going to eat the good stuff, the meat, the organs. He might eat a couple of the smaller bones, but he's not going to waste his time eating or chomping on those bigger bones. So what about the duration? How long does it take to consume the prey item? Say it's a medium-sized elk. That elk will be gone within a day or two with a pack of wolves, no doubt. With a cougar, that cougar might feed on it for 4 to 7 days, depending on the size of that animal. And the bear, as long as it takes. Again, this is kind of like a dessert item for them, so they'll just feed for as long as they want to. So how we doing on time? You know what? I'm going to do something quick. Kimberly, y'all can type the answers in the chat. What I'm going to do, I'm going to show you, and this is your time to step away. If you get queasy with particular kill sites, I will have, none of them will be super graphic, but if you don't like seeing dead animals, you might want to step away for a bit. But I was going to do a little test and show different kill sites, and you tell me what type of animal is responsible. The thing is, when it comes to pictures are two-dimensional. When you're there in person, you can walk around, you can get a better feel, you can see things from different angles. And so pictures can sometimes be a little misleading. So I'll give you a little hint at what we're looking at. And so if you're ready for a quiz, I'm going to start now, and I'll go through this pretty quickly. But this was obviously an aerial photo. The kill site is spread out over a great distance. And so this is something that would be indicative of a wolf kill site. So many wolves feeding on a carcass of some sort. Again, it's that family dinner. Everyone's going for the same food at once. They're tugging, they're pulling. So the kill site is spread out over a great distance. Again, they're not caching it, they're just eating it. All right, this one, the main thing to look at here, the only thing remaining here that you're looking at is the hooves and a bunch of the hair. And so when I was telling you, for some reason, I don't know why it is, but felines tend to leave the base of the hooves or the base of the legs still intact. So this is a cougar kill site. If you don't know what you're looking at here, I'll let you know. This is actually where the stomach and some of the intestines were actually dragged out of the carcass and put off to the side. And so once again, this would be indicative of a cougar kill site. This one is really interesting. It's what remains. There's a couple of clues here, but you see some of the larger bones are still left behind. You can actually, so yeah, the skull vertebrae are left behind. So not all the bones have been eaten. One of the things that's interesting is the poop. It kind of looks, it's just a little bit larger than your dog poop. So this is actually where a single wolf was feeding on a carcass. The interesting thing to note, look at the jaw on the carcass. That is another type of carnivore that this wolf ended up eating. So actually pretty good size. So I don't know the circumstances behind that picture, but this is actually where a wolf has been feeding on this site. Here's a situation. The main thing I want to show here is that the hair has been plucked from the chest area before they went into it. So this animal was probably scared off the kill site, but it was just starting the process. And that's very indicative of a cougar, where they will pluck some of the chest hair before they get into that chest cavity. Another kill site, which is really hard to discern because it's probably like way past the time the animal fed on it, but the main thing that remains here is pretty much just the teeth. Even the large bones have been consumed. There's a little bit of hair laying around. And here's another, this is actually a kill site I visited. Most of the skull was crushed and eaten. A lot of the larger leg bones, there's a bit of the spine left and a couple of the ribs, but most of the bones have been devoured. This was, again, a cougar kill site. This particular carcass, and this is where I'm throwing a lesson from my first class in. This is obviously a moose. It's a very large carcass. But if you notice where it is in the water, this is actually lots of bones remain, but this is actually where a large pack of wolves ran down a moose, and this is where he made their last stand. And so anyway, it's pretty interesting to know the feeding patterns and the takedown patterns of these large animals, and you can start piecing together what you find in the woods. And I always throw a tough one in there. This is a white-tailed deer. The thing to keep in mind here is all the organs, all the bones, everything's still intact. Not everything, the main reason I put it in here, not everything gets killed by an apex predator. This actual deer was struck by a vehicle and ended up dying off on the side. The only thing that has fed on it are primarily some of the scavenging birds and some of the mesopredators. So not everything gets eaten by an apex predator. So anyway, I'm going to wrap up here, Kim. We're going good on time. I love teaching this stuff. I have been taught this stuff by some amazing people that have also provided a lot of this information for you guys to get at it. So Mountain Lion Foundation has some really good information. Lots of the state wildlife agencies have really good information. Alaska's got some good stuff regarding investigating kill sites. So by all means, don't just learn from me. Dig in, find some really good information. The one thing I got to warn you, though, is make sure your information source is credible. Don't read Joe's hiking blog to get all your wildlife. He might be amazing, but make sure you're getting scientific information from good scientific sources. So in summary for today, knowing the feeding behavior is a really critical step in identifying like potential predator identity, at least what animal has been feeding on this kill site. The main thing is just divide it up in those three families: canids, felids, ursids. You'll know whether or not it's pretty much a bear, cougar, or wolf or other canine. Narrow down the culprit using other evidence. So besides looking at that carcass, look for scat, look for tracks, look for anything you could find that could help narrow down what animal actually killed the prey or was feeding on the prey. And the one thing I'm always stressing is knowing your animal ranges. If you're in the east, you're not going to have a grizzly kill site or a cougar kill site. If you're in the west and Canada especially, you run the gamut. It could be absolutely any one of those because many of the places you guys are at have all of those apex predators. So you guys are lucky in that regard. With that, I'm going to say thank you. I got to give photo credits because obviously my slides are nothing without good photos. If you do like these talks, I keep doing them for Kim as long as Kim wants me to. I do have a website. I do have a little podcast that we did. We're trying to get that up and running again. Main thing, I do have a Facebook page called Wildlife for You, so you can go on there and follow us there. But I put it in the chat, a link. I recently released a book about my early adventures working with bears in the Smokies. It's called Spooning a Bear. They're all true stories about some of my earlier days as a wildlife bear biologist. But you can just get on Amazon and type in Spooning a Bear, and you could paperback, Kindle, or audio. And so with that, these are a bunch of the classes I've done, and I will keep doing them as long as I'm still breathing. So with this cough, I don't know how much longer that'll be. Anyway, you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. And Kim, I can't see the chat, so you'll have to read them to me.
Of course, absolutely. Thank you so much, Daryl. That was amazing. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions. Every question you posed, they threw back a ton of answers and they were very spot on. So
I feel bad. I
well.
couldn't see. I didn't realize once I went to my slideshow, I couldn't see the chat box anymore.
No, it's okay. But they got them right. They did really good. So
good.
I'm just gonna jump in here to look at what questions people have. I have a question that I've been wanting to ask is when I did learn about how cougars feed on their prey, and also learned when we look at the hierarchy of how often cougars do lose their kills to other larger predators. My theory was like, oh, well, I wonder if the reason why they eat all the major organs first is because they've got to eat the good stuff before another carnivore comes and steals it from them.
Absolutely. They are true. They're called true carnivores. They're obligate carnivores. So they've got to eat meat to survive. And so when they invest all that time, make a kill, they're gonna eat the best parts first. They go right for that chest cavity, get the most nutritious stuff. In the event that they do get scared off that carcass, they still got a big reward for making that kill site or making that kill.
Yeah, no, it's great. I'm just looking at some of these questions here. There's so many great answers. All right, here we go.
Yeah, I buggered you up by having everyone type in stuff.
No, that's okay. Any ideas why bears eat the hind end first?
I'm sorry, say that again. I started talking over.
Why do bears eat the hind end and then proceed forward?
Like I said, they're not in a rush with exactly what I just told you, Kim. With wolves and cougars, especially with cougars, they got to eat the good stuff first because they don't know how long they're going to be feeding on that carcass because another bigger animal could scare them away. A bear, on the other hand, nothing's going to scare them off pretty much. If you're a black bear, yes, you could be scared off by a grizzly. But because the bears are not dependent on that carcass to survive, they could eat grass, they could eat berries, they could eat a whole host of other things that are readily available. It's kind of like a dessert. So they're just going to eat a little bit here. They don't get me wrong, they may very well, especially if the carcass is split open and the internal organs are right there, they might eat that first. But they're not in that rush that the cougars and the wolves are to get the most nutritious things. They know that carcass is going to be theirs for as long as they're there. So they're going to take their time and just start eating wherever they sit down first, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I've seen cases where grizzlies have killed black bears that are just happen to be in their habitat and then not eat them, just kill them. And then that's it, don't come near my area.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there's many situations, Kim, where a bear will kill another bear and then consume and eat the other bear. The one slide I had where the wolf was feeding on, it appeared to be another carnivore. There's a good chance that could have been a cougar. Whether or not the cougar was killed by whatever, we don't know, but apex predators will eat carcasses regardless if it's a herbivore, omnivore, carnivore, whatever it is. They're going to eat it because they need that meat.
Here's a question about coyotes. Do they hunt in packs?
Oh, for the most part, coyotes are generally solitary hunters, but a lot of times coyotes live in these family type of units. And when you have a mother, father, and the offspring all in the same area, they may go out and hunt individually. But if an individual coyote encounters a prey item, and that individual coyote's gonna struggle, even with a large deer, an individual coyote might not be able to take it down. But what happens is, if the coyote is yelping and making noise, it will attract its other family members. And before you know it, that deer, instead of facing one coyote, is suddenly surrounded by other members of the family. Then when you have 3 or 4 coyotes on a small deer, then they could easily overwhelm that deer. So typically they don't go out hunting in packs, but when they go out hunting, they can pack up quickly in case there's a larger predator that, or a larger prey item that they may need help taking down. So unlike a wolf pack that runs all together in a group of animals, the coyotes, for the most part, are pretty solitary when they're wandering around the landscape.
Yeah. I mostly just see them by themselves too.
Yep.
Brian Pedersen wants you to say strategy again.
Strategy. I saw you laughing at it too. I had a big old brain fart there.
Yeah, is it funny how sometimes a word just does not want to come out? Yeah.
Well, the reason I sometimes give this talk with Stephanie Payne, she couldn't join us tonight, but Stephanie cannot say the word kleptoparasitism. So I usually put that up and say, and I'll ask her to say it, and she gets mad at me for that. Apparently I can't say strategy.
My worst word, which I had no idea until I started doing a radio show, was I can't say wildlife. I say wildlife. I had to re-record it. They're like, no, Kim, wildlife. I'm like, wow, you'd think I wouldn't be able to get that one.
Yep.
All right. Any other questions before we do a giveaway? No, I think that's it. That's great. They really got it.
And I will do a post probably on the Wildlife for You site about today's presentation. And if anyone has any questions and you're there, ask away. I actually kind of prefer when people post a question on Facebook, because there could be a dozen others that have the same question, but or they're too afraid to ask, or they didn't think of it. And so that way we can answer it publicly and everyone can learn from that.
Yeah, totally agree. That's a great idea. And hopefully with YouTube, we're going to stick it on our YouTube, and hopefully that gets out there more, and then people posting questions. One question here: how can you tell if a cache is from a cougar or a bear? Well, I think we've answered that. Are there specific signs that other than organs being removed? Well, we've talked about hair removal, and yeah, I think you've covered pretty much the basics on that.
Yeah, the cougar plucks the hair. They also occasionally will remove and set the stomach and intestines away. Sadly, like if you come across a cached mule deer, sometimes you don't know between a cougar and a bear, but that's, if you do encounter that, what should you have in your hand? Bear spray. You just got to be right. We know it's effective on bears. It's been shown to be effective on cougars on occasion. So if you encounter a cache site, make sure your spidey senses are tingling, because that animal is probably going to be really close by.
Yeah. And if it's the middle of the winter and bears are denning and you find a food cache, it's usually a cougar when it's covered up with forest debris. So That's an easy one because, you know, even if bears do wake up in the winter, they're generally not going to be going out and eating, as we've talked about. You know, Daryl did a talk for us on bear denning and the whole topic of hibernation. So you can check that talk out as well. I am going to do a couple giveaways. Judy Bolton, I don't know if you're here. Oh, wait, I do see you that you are. You won a scat belt. Where did I put that thing? If you've ever seen one of these belts before and I've completely lost it, they're awesome. I love them. And I highly recommend everyone check them out. And we'll put them out in the thank you, but www.scatbelt.com, that's their website. And they're basically a holster for carrying your bear spray. So Judy, if you want to send me an email, my email is kim@bearsafety.com. And let me know what your address is and if you want a small, medium, or a large, extra large, and then we'll get that shipped off to you. And Scat Belt donates these belts every single talk that we have, and they also give everyone 15% off, and 15% off if you go on their website, and the coupon code is RecSafe, or you can use Kim, one of the two. And then the other giveaway we wanted to do tonight was for the 2-hour bear safety class, which is online, on demand on our website, RecSafe with Wildlife. And the winner for that is Paul S. Is Paul S here tonight? We pre-raffled this. I think that, oh yeah, there's a Paul S. So same thing. Congratulations, Paul. If you want to send me an email, kim@bearsafety.com, I'll send you a coupon code so you can get 100% off the class. And for everyone else, everyone gets 20% off the class if you want to go and take our bear safety course online. And the coupon for that is the meal. And you can go take that course online and get 20% off when you go to pay. And then you own the course for life. And every spring when it's bear season's about to start, sit down with your family or your fellow hikers or people that you fish or hunt with, and take the course together, and you know, have some beer and bears, and be prepared for getting out there. So I just want to thank Daryl again. You have no idea how much this means to me. I really, really appreciate your time and all of the knowledge that you share with all these wonderful folks. So thank you.
Happy to do it, Kim.
All right, and don't forget to check out Daryl's book and Wildlife for You, and he's got so many amazing resources, and I think you'll really enjoy his book. Sounds like a lot of fun. All right, everyone, take care. Thanks for tonight. All right, see you later, Daryl. Bye. Thank you.